We have the pleasure now of being joined by Pro Football Focus college football analyst Max Chadwick, and more importantly, to be honest, former WAER sports talk director Max Chadwick. So a WAER alum back on the podcast. How are we doing so far this season, Max?
Dude, I'm doing great. And actually, I forgot to tell you this before we started recording, but the Ostrom Avenue pod was actually started by my best friend and former roommate of 3 years, Owen Valentine. He and Brendan Mortensen started it up that year, and then they kind of continued it on. So it's cool that it continued on, ever since we graduated and all that. So, yeah, it's cool to be on Owen's former pod. I was never good enough to be on Owen's pod. Actually, I think it was on one time when he was hosting it. He had me on one time because I was begging him to be on it, but. Yeah, it's cool to be back on it a few years later now, man.
Yeah, we're almost at episode 200 total wise, which is getting crazy. Last winter we had Owen, we had Brendan Mortensen on, the kind of the pod fathers, if you want to call them that. So that was fun to bring them back on. In the winter. We were talking a little basketball. We got a lot of football to talk about today. Syracuse football starting out 2-0, the big win over number 23 Georgia Tech. And I guess just to start, were you shocked to see the success, not necessarily against Ohio, but against Georgia Tech early in the season in year one against under Fran Brown?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting a victory, but I was expecting it to be a close game, which it was. And I just was really impressed by how Syracuse handled them that game, honestly. And I think you look at what Georgia Tech did a couple weeks earlier to Florida State with their ground game, and Syracuse had issues with it sometimes, but at the same time, like they weren't getting gashed like Florida State was. And if you asked me preseason, was a better defensive line, Florida State or Syracuse, I would have said Florida State easily. So it was pretty impressive that the defense kind of held up in that game. And Kyle McCord obviously has been nothing short of spectacular through 2 weeks right now. So it was really good to see Syracuse just kind of win that game. And in my opinion, they should be ranked right now. Maybe there's a little bit of bias in that when I say that, but I think Syracuse is at least on the cusp of being ranked. And if they rattle off a victory against Stanford next Friday night, maybe they'll be able to be ranked, heading into the week after.
Yeah, it should be interesting if they beat Stanford. UNLV's got a big game against Kansas this Friday, and then that game at UNLV could be a sneaky good game out there in Las Vegas. You mentioned Kyle McCord. He's obviously been the story of the first 2 weeks, third in the FBS in terms of passing yards, first in pass touchdowns. What have you seen from him that's just made him be this good through the first couple games?
Yeah, I think what I've been so impressed by, and this is a very early in the season, it's a small sample, so obviously you gotta see how the rest of the season goes. But last year at Ohio State, one of his biggest issues was under pressure. He was just not good, and when he was kept clean, he was really really good. This year, I believe he's in the 95th or 91st percentile in terms of under pressure grade. Now, I will say once again, small sample size, and under pressure is very volatile, meaning he could be great one week and then bad the next week. It's not as, predictable as how you perform when you're kept clean. But I will say what he's done under pressure this year has been really good. And I'm really impressed by that. And again, last year, he quite literally was one of the best quarterbacks in the country when he was kept clean and one of the worst quarterbacks in the country when he's under pressure. This year, he's still really good when he's kept clean. And now he's a lot better when he's under pressure, too. So that's something I've really been impressed by with Kyle McCord so far. And he's just been delivering strikes. And I think he has right now, he's tied for second in the country in big time throws. So he's doing such an amazing job right now, and I'm curious to see how he does the rest of the year. But what's really impressed me is that he's one of the highest graded quarterbacks in the country. I think he's one of the 15 highest graded in the country, and they've played two decently hard games. Right, Ohio is going to be one of the top teams in the MAC this year. Georgia Tech obviously was a ranked team entering that week. While as a lot of the other quarterbacks who were that highly graded, they played two really easy games to start the year. So that's really encouraging going forward that, hey, McCord has done this against pretty good competition. It stands to reason that he could keep this up all year.
When you look at who McCord has on the offense, the two guys that come to mind, at least at the wide receiver spot so far this year, is Arande Gadsden and Trevor Pena. Trevor Pena kind of coming out of nowhere. He didn't play all last year, had some pedestrian stats the year before. Are you shocked that Trevor Pena has kind of exploded as that, slot guy, not comparative to Arande, the height, the weight, the kind of thing, but kind of that Wes Welker small slot guy for Syracuse?
Yeah, he's been awesome. Rondé, I had no doubts that he would be one of the top tight ends or receive. He's really kind of a wide receiver. This year he's playing a little more tight end, but he's really good. And I always knew that. And I actually interviewed Rondé last year because of how good he was a couple years ago. But yeah, I think Trevor Pena, though, is a guy that really has emerged this year, and that's huge. And even a guy like Jackson Meeks, I've been impressed by as well. in that receiving core. So all of a sudden, this receiving core for Syracuse that in past has been a weakness has turned into a really big strength of the team right now. And if you look at the highest graded players for Syracuse so far on offense, at least, it's McCord, obviously number one, but right after that, it's Gadsden, Pena, and then Beeks. So it's been really encouraging to see those guys play as well as they have so far. And Syracuse is a really dynamic receiving core right now. It's not just a Rondé Gadsden. You got to keep in mind of Trevor Pena and Jackson Beeks now too.
Yeah, Justice Ross Simmons still out with the hamstring injury, the Colorado State transfer as well. When you look at the wide receiver room as a whole, where would you kind of put them in the ACC from top to bottom in terms of depth?
Yeah, probably in the top half, I would say. I'm trying to think of who like the really good ones are in the ACC right now. Miami's probably got the best one. I would say Miami's is loaded. I think that they're one of my top 10 receiving cores entering the year. But I think you look at the Syracuse receiving core, like I said though, and you have guys like Zede Haynes I didn't mention before, he's got a up and down start to the season so far, but he's got a lot of talent in my opinion. There's some really really good receivers in that receiver room for Syracuse. So yeah, I would say Miami still got the best one in the country, but Syracuse is starting to emerge as a really good one. And I think I would certainly put them in the top half of the ACC and maybe even top 5 in the ACC for how they perform so far.
Something that I've been impressed with is the distribution, especially in that game against Georgia Tech. Arande and Trevor had 6 catches. 2 other receivers had 5, and 2 other ones had 4. It's pretty hard for a defense to guard that if you're distributing all around the field. You can't really hone in necessarily on one player. When you look at the SU offense, it's been pretty good so for the most part so far this season, except for that first drive of the year with the almost interception and a 3 and out. But what do you think the offense needs to improve on following this bye week and going into that Stanford game the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think my question for Syracuse entering the year was the offensive line, and I still have some questions on the offensive line right now. Now, some of them have performed decently well, like Demetrius Weatherspoon's looked pretty decent so far, and John Ray Reed has looked pretty decent so far. But I look at the other guys; they haven't performed great. And then again, with Kyle McCord under pressure, that's a big talking point because if he's under pressure a lot, and again, he's looked good so far, but how volatile it is and all that. That could be a big issue. So that was one of the things I was really concerned about going into the year for Syracuse was the offensive line I'm not really that confident in, and you have a quarterback who is not necessarily the best under pressure either. So yeah, that's an issue so far. Pass blocking right now, Syracuse is 57th in the country in terms of pass blocking grade, and they're 80th in the country in terms of run blocking grade. So they're not performing great so far. Again, they played decent competition so far too, so it's very important to keep in mind that maybe they'll move up the list when other teams start playing good competition. But so far this year, the offensive line has been about as good as I would have thought it was entering the year, maybe a little bit better, but it's still something I have my eye on going forward. Because really, outside of that, we mentioned the receiving core has been really good. McCord has been excellent, and even LaQuint Allen has looked good too. So there's really nothing else in the offense to be really complaining about too much. But the offensive line is still something to at least keep an eye on the rest of the season.
You mentioned LaQuint Allen, and he does it both in the rushing game and the receiving game as well, coming out of the backfield. Where do you have him in terms of the Pro Football Focus kind of ratings and analytics within the ACC or within the country going into the season, and where he is right now?
Yeah, he's had right now a 72.8 grade this year, which is really solid. Anytime you're in the 70s, that's a really solid mark to be. So he's a guy who's played so far. He's got the 6th highest grade in the ACC among running backs. So he's certainly been one of the better running backs we have in the ACC right now. And you mentioned it. He's got 70 plus grades as both a receiver and a runner. And I'm looking right now, only one other running back in the ACC even has that, which is Brashard Smith from SMU. So LaQuint Allen is certainly one of the most versatile backs that we have in the conference right now, and one of the more versatile backs we have in the country. And he's been a guy that McCord has really been able to rely on. If, say, Gadsden or Pena or whoever is not open down the field, there's always the option of dumping it off to LaQuint Allen. And so that's been a really encouraging sign. And LaQuint Allen has certainly been one of the better backs in the ACC because of it.
Switching over to the defense plugged some run holes last week against Georgia Tech. One of the reasons being Fadil Diggs has been insane so far this season, transferring over from Texas A&M, leads the nation in tackles for loss, although it's a small sample size. Based on what he's done in the first couple of games, do you think he could be an ACC Defensive Player of the Year come the end of the season?
Maybe, yeah, you could. There's certainly a lot of other guys that I put in that conversation. Like the Miami defensive line, it just has like 4 superstars that I think it's going to be tough for Deal to outperform them. But yeah, there's some really good players they see on the defense side of the ball. Peter Woods from Clemson. I'm trying to yeah, Ruben Bain from Miami is a guy that I put up there, but Diggs has looked pretty good. He has a 70 grade so far, really good. He's a 91.2 pass rushing grade, which is one of the highest in the country right now. So as a run defender, there's some things to work on, and I know he makes plays in the backfield, but there are times where he gets a little overeager and a little too aggressive, and maybe misses a tackle or misses his assignment in the run game because of it. But as a pass rusher, there's zero to complain about right now. He has been an outstanding pass rusher so far this season. So yeah, Field Diggs has been the best defender for Syracuse so far, and he's been a really, again, one of the brightest spots in the team. It's just how good of a pass rusher he's been through 2 weeks so far.
In terms of the overall defense, it was a solid performance both against Georgia Tech and against Ohio, and it's a little bit different in terms they ran more of like a 3-3-5 against Georgia Tech because they lost Marlo Ax, and they ran more of a 4-2-5 against Ohio. But what have you seen from the new defensive coordinator Elijah Robinson in his first 2 games at SU?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, Georgia Tech's not an easy team to defend. I mean, go ask Florida State, right? I mean, how hard they were to stop for Florida State with that ground game, and Syracuse did a pretty decent job of that. So I still think the run defense tackling could use some work, and I think the coverage unit has had some problems too at times this year. But overall, I mean, the defense has performed as about as well as you could have hoped for. They have, I think, the offense is definitely the better unit on the team right now, and there are bigger issues with the defense than there are with the offense. But again, they played two decent teams start the year, and they've beaten both of them. So that's a good sign for Syracuse going forward. But yeah, I think the run defense and coverage unit need to step up a little bit more than they have been when they get in the ACC play. But pass rushing wise, Syracuse has been a really good pass rushing team led by Fidel Diggs. So yeah, I think there's certainly things to clean up in terms of tackling and run defense and coverage. But overall, I mean, they're 2-0, so it's hard to complain too much about that.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at being 1-0, especially since Marlo Ax got injured in game number 1, how big is the absence of Marlo Ax in the middle of that Orange defense for the next couple weeks until he gets back, probably after the NC State game, I think was the estimation.
It's huge. Yeah, because like I just said, the biggest issue I've had with Syracuse's defense so far has been the tackling and run defense, and Marlo Wax is obviously probably the better run defenders and tacklers in the entire team right now. So without him, I think the big issue is that the linebackers have just not performed great. I know Fidel Diggs is playing linebacker, but he's just a little bit of an edge rusher too. But guys like Anwar Sparrow and Derek McDonald have had okay grades to start the year so far. So yeah, I think when he gets back, that's just another superstar you can add to that defense. And he's probably the Syracuse's best defender. I know Fidel Diggs looked really good so far, but I would say Marlo Wax is probably the best defender on the team, if not Justin Barron, who's been okay so far at the start of the year as well. But yeah, I think that's a huge addition they'll get back in hopefully a couple weeks, because he is one of the better linebackers in college football, honestly.
Syracuse in the bye week this week, so it gives an extra week for Marlo to get back and not miss an extra game. Looking at the schedule going forward, they got Stanford and then UNLV and then a road matchup at NC State before another bye week. If you're looking at the Syracuse schedule as a whole, what game are you pointing to as the hardest one left on SU's schedule?
Oh, it's pretty easily Miami. Miami is a team that I was extremely high on entering the year. I had them as my number 12 team in the country, I believe. And they've proven that so far and then some. And now they're a top 10 team in the country, in my opinion. So, yeah, Miami is pretty clearly the best team in the ACC. And I think, I know it's at home, I believe, but I know it's at a home game. But at the same time, like, Miami is just so good, and they're going to be a playoff team, in my opinion. And I think that's definitely the hardest game for Syracuse going forward.
When you look at the schedule again, what's the most intriguing game? Like if Syracuse wins this game, it could mean good things, for the rest of the season, or a potential 8-9 win season for SU.
Yeah, I would say, you got a stretch of games where you play teams like, Virginia Tech and Boston College and NC State. If they could win those kind of games, that could be huge for them in terms of, being a 9 or 10 win team. And then all of a sudden you start talking playoff, which is crazy to think about for Syracuse. But if they win 9 or 10 games, like they can absolutely make the playoff, but or at least 10 or 11 games probably. But I think Stanford game would be interesting. They should win that game though. The UNLV one is one I'm really circling, because if they win that game, they beat Stanford and they beat Holy Cross, and then the UNLV game in Las Vegas on a Friday night. UNLV is a dangerous team. I think UNLV is going to be one of the better teams in the Group of 5 this year and one of the playoff contenders from the Group of 5. If Syracuse can beat them, then I'll be pretty optimistic going forward, because then you're talking about what a 5-0 record that Syracuse would have. So all of a sudden you're saying, okay, yeah, they can start to rattle off some wins here. I know they got some harder games coming up after that, but yeah, I think the UNLV game is one that could really set the tone for the rest of the season. If they lose to UNLV, then I'll be a lot more pessimistic about Syracuse's rest of the season. But they beat UNLV. There's a chance of reason that, hey, if they're 5-0, they'll probably be ranked. And then also you start to look at some of the other games in the schedule. So yeah, they could maybe beat NC State, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Cal. Those are, the type of games that Syracuse maybe has a shot to win. And yeah, we can talk about an amazing season for Syracuse all of a sudden.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that point. It's so funny this season too. It's everyone's like, you get to 5-0, and then who knows the rest of the year. It's the same thing from the last two seasons. You get to 4-0, then you play Clemson in the Dome, and then it goes all downhill from there. Season before that, you get to was it 6-0, beat NC State at home when they were missing a quarterback, and then you go on the road to Clemson. You looked like you were on the road to winning that game, and then Elijah Fuentes kind of hits Cade Klubnik out of bounds, and it all spells downhill from there. In terms of the overall ACC, you mentioned Miami being probably one of, if not the best team in the conference. Who else kind of do you think about in that top tier of the conference competing to go to that ACC championship game?
Yeah, I think I would probably put Clemson still in that boat. They looked a lot better against App State this past weekend. That defense is nasty. But the issue is, can you just trust that Cade Klubnik's going to lead you to the promised land, honestly? So they're a school I'd put up there. I think Louisville is really good. I think they're a really underrated team, and I would have them in the top 15 right now. I think they're probably the second best team outside of Miami. And I think Louisville could be another team that once again goes to the ACC title game this year, like they did last year. And then, yeah, Boston College had a great start to the year. I don't know how much that'll stick the rest of the year. And they have a huge, huge game this weekend against Missouri to kind of show who they are. But I think Boston College is a school to keep an eye on, as they're a ranked team right now. Cal has had a great start to their year. They're a pretty good team and have a conversation to be ranked right now as well. But I think the big ones right now are Miami, Louisville, and Clemson. Those are pretty clearly the top three for me in the ACC right now.
When you look at SU's schedule, once again, trying to get to 8-9 wins, if you keep winning, potentially be in that conversation for the ACC championship game if you win pretty much every game. But what at this point would you be your final record prediction after the 2-0 start for Syracuse?
I would say literally what you just said, between 8 and 9 wins right now. I think 8-4, 9-3 is exactly what I'm expecting. I think anything more than that will be amazing. If they can get to double-digit wins, it's amazing for Syracuse. And if they go 7-5, I would be a little disappointed if I'm a Syracuse fan as of right now. So I think 8-4, 9-3. That's kind of what I'm expecting for Syracuse this year. I think obviously that Miami game I think is almost guaranteed a loss with how good Miami is. We'll see how Syracuse is at the end of the year, but that's one of those games. And then you start talking about, UNLV and NC State and Virginia Tech and Boston College and Cal. Like those are all pretty good teams that Syracuse can feasibly lose to, right? So those are some games I think Syracuse could lose. And yeah, if they lose all of those games, right, we're talking about what, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 6 losses or whatever. But I don't think they'll lose all of them. But those are all games I think are kind of toss-ups for me right now that Syracuse could feasibly lose. And so that's why I'm expecting, after 2-0 start, 8-4, 9-3 is kind of what I'm expecting right now.
That Miami game is interesting because even if, like, let's say Syracuse wins a bunch of games, they're in contention, they're ranked going into that Miami game. It's the week 2 days after Thanksgiving. So I'd be interested to see what the crowd would be like at that game. Basketball season's already started, maybe even a basketball game the day before or 2 days before. There actually is one on a Wednesday. So basketball game like 3 days before, and then a big game, Syracuse, Miami in the Dome. I wonder if people would pack it for football.
I would go, man. I don't know. I was telling my little brother I was trying to get out there to see a game this year, and I don't know if I could swing it, but I'm trying to get out there for a basketball game though, for sure, because I know the team with Donnie Freeman going in there, it's gonna be a lot of fun. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they do this year, and hopefully Syracuse, like I said in that Miami game, hopefully this is a ranked matchup at the end of the year if they could rattle off a lot more wins than we're expecting.
Yeah, Syracuse does not do anyone trying to catch a game any favors by not having any home games in the month of October.
Yeah.
But they got a bunch of them in November. They go out to Cal, they go out to BC, they play Virginia Tech before that. So it should be a fun season. But before we wrap up, as a WAER Sports Talk alum, I got to ask, what's your favorite memory going back to the days when you were the talk director?
Oh God, that's a really good question. There's so many. We went to Clemson my senior year for the football game when Trevor Lawrence was there, which was really cool. And
This was the year
uh,
after the upset, right?
this is the year.
Or was
No,
it
a
the year
couple.
before?
No, it was it was 3 years after, because I was a
Oh, wow.
freshman when I was a freshman when they upset Clemson.
Were you in the
So
Dome for that?
Yes, I was. Yeah, it was a great night. That was a lot. Actually, parents' weekend too, which is really cool. That my parents were actually at that game as well. But yes, I think that Clemson trip was really fun. We technically weren't really allowed to do it. I think we broke a lot of rules by doing it because it was right in the heat of COVID. And we were like, screw it, we're going. And thankfully, the AER had our back with that. Because we kind of just did it. So that was a lot of fun. The one time Cooper Boardman and I went to ACC tournament, and we got found out the day of the game, the first game for Syracuse, the ACC tournament in North Carolina. We drove down that we were exposed to COVID, and we drove all the way back home after not doing anything at the ACC tournament. So that was like, it was a bad memory, of course, but at the same time, like Cooper, who's again one of my best friends, I roomed with him for 4 years. We just drove home. We were just like, we just like an hour into the drive, like a 6 hour drive. We just looked at each other and we just started laughing. Like, dude, this is ridiculous. So that was like a bad memory that ended up being a really funny memory. I actually hosted a double overtime with Owen in our living room because again we were exposed to COVID and we were gonna host the show anyways, and we had one of the Comrexes with us, and we're like, hey, we could just do it here. So we actually hosted a double overtime in my living room, which is crazy to think about now. So yeah, it's been a lot of really good memories, man. It was an amazing 4 years at Syracuse. And I was 2 year talk director, which is really fun as well. And yeah, it was just a lot of really, really fun memories, at doing the double overtime, dealing with Pat from Syracuse and all those callers. And yeah, it was some of the best memories I've ever had was at AER. So I'm really grateful for them.
I can confirm Pat from Syracuse still calls into the double overtime, especially during
Sure.
basketball season.
He'll always do. Yeah, he will. I've zero doubt that he'll always be able to call it a double overtime at all times.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for hopping on, Max. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate you, man.